It was one of those nights that felt cursed from the start. Thick, dark clouds hung heavy in the sky, suffocating the moonlight. Rain poured relentlessly, hammering against the windshield as lightning streaked across the blackened sky. A rural highway stretched endlessly in front of Jake and Emily as they drove, the headlights barely cutting through the downpour. The storm had been building for hours, growing more ferocious with every mile. Thunder growled like an angry beast in the distance, shaking the car as they pressed forward. Jake gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. He hated driving in storms like this. "This rain is insane," Jake muttered, squinting as the wipers struggled to clear the water. "We should have stayed at your parents' house tonight." Emily sighed, her eyes fixed on the sheets of rain outside. "It's just a little storm. We'll be fine once we're home." The road was empty, flanked by dense trees on either side. The occasional burst of lightning illuminated the forest, casting long, flickering shadows. The radio crackled, static drowning out the faint sound of music before it died completely. They drove in tense silence until a sudden flash of lightning illuminated something up ahead. A figure standing by the side of the road, waving frantically. "Did you see that?" Emily asked, sitting up straighter. "Yeah," Jake replied, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. As they drew closer, they saw a man, drenched from head to toe, his hood pulled low over his face. He waved desperately, his arms flailing as the rain battered him. Jake frowned. "No way, we're not stopping." "We can't just leave him out here," Emily protested. "He'll freeze to death." "Or rob us," Jake muttered under his breath. Emily shot him a look. "Come on, he needs help." Reluctantly, Jake slowed the car and pulled over. The figure hesitated for a moment before trudging toward them, water streaming from his clothes. As he opened the back door and climbed in, a chill filled the car, making Jake shiver. "Thanks," the man mumbled. His voice was low and gravelly. "Where are you headed?" Emily asked, trying to sound friendly. The man didn't respond immediately. He leaned back in the seat, the sound of water dripping onto the floor mats, filling the silence. "Just up the road," he finally said. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face. His features were sharp and gaunt, his eyes sunken and dark. Something about him made Jake's skin crawl. "What were you doing out there in this weather?" Emily asked. The man was silent for a moment. Then he chuckled softly. "Got caught in the storm. Happens more than you think on this road." "Really?" Emily prompted. "Oh yeah," the man said, his voice carrying a strange, unsettling calmness. "Lots of accidents. People drive too fast, lose control, especially on nights like this." Jake tightened his grip on the wheel, a sense of unease growing stronger. He glanced in the rearview mirror. The man's eyes gleamed in the dark, reflecting the brief flashes of lightning. "There was a bad wreck not far from here," the man continued. "About a year ago. Car flipped right into the ditch. Driver didn't make it." Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "That's awful." "Yeah," the man whispered. "Real shame." The rain intensified, hammering the car with deafening force. Each flash of lightning seemed brighter than the last, and the thunder roared like cannon fire. Jake glanced again in the mirror, but for a split second, it felt as if he saw something else. Something wrong. The reflection seemed off, distorted. The man's eyes appeared unnaturally bright, and his face seemed different. "How far up the road do you need to go?" Jake asked, his voice tense. The man didn't answer right away. He stared out the window as if lost in thought. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Not far. Just a little farther." As the car rounded a curve, lightning illuminated the road ahead. For a fleeting moment, Jake saw figures standing by the roadside, dark, motionless silhouettes that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. His breath caught in his throat. "Did you see that?" "See what?" Emily asked, turning to him. Jake swallowed hard. "Never mind." The radio crackled to life, a burst of static and distorted voices filling the car. Words twisted and garbled, but one phrase was clear. "Storm. Fatal accident. No survivors." Jake switched it off with a trembling hand. The man in the back seat chuckled again, a low, chilling sound that sent a shiver down Jake's spine. "You hear about the legend of this road?" the man asked suddenly. "Legend?" Emily repeated. "They say on stormy nights the dead hitch rides," the man whispered, "looking for a way home." Silence filled the car, heavy and suffocating. "I think this is far enough," Jake said, pulling over abruptly. "You can get out here." The man didn't move. Rain pounded the roof, thunder shaking the car. I said. Lightning struck nearby, blinding them for a moment. When the light faded, the back seat was empty. Water dripped onto the seat, pooling where the man had been. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Where did he go?" Jake stared in disbelief. "He was just here." Panic surged as he scanned the road. No sign of the man, no footprints in the mud, just the relentless storm. Without another word, he hit the gas, the tires skidding on the slick pavement as they raced away. They drove in silence, hearts pounding, eyes darting to every shadow. When they finally reached home, Jake killed the engine and they sat in the car, drenched in fear. Emily broke the silence. "Look at my shoulder." Jake turned. A wet handprint, large and unmistakable, stained her sweater. The next morning, the news reported a body found on the same stretch of highway. A man who had died in a crash 10 years ago during a thunderstorm. His body had been buried, but some storms never let the past rest. And some rides never end. It was a stormy night in the quiet suburbs, the kind of storm that seemed to come alive with a fury of nature's wrath. Sheets of rain battered the windows, and the wind howled like a restless spirit. Lightning flashed, illuminating the dim interior of Mark's home, and thunder cracked overhead, making the walls tremble. Mark sat alone in his living room, the glow from his television the only source of light. The power had already flickered twice, and he half expected the house to be plunged into darkness at any moment. He was trying to enjoy a true crime documentary, but his mind kept drifting to the storm outside. The storm felt ominous, as if it carried with it something more than just rain and wind. OUS, that worms and eels, a crazy nightmare. Just as a particularly loud boom of thunder rolled through, there was a faint knock at the back door. Mark froze, his eyes darting to the kitchen where the door was located. He muted the TV and listened, but all he could hear was the steady drum of rain. He told himself it was just the wind. The knock came again. This time it was unmistakable. 3 slow, deliberate raps. Mark's stomach tightened. He got up, heart thudding, and crept toward the back door. The glass window was fogged, blurring whatever might be outside. He flipped on the porch light, but it only illuminated the rain pouring down in heavy sheets. He stood there, gripping the doorknob, and peered into the dark. Lightning lit up the backyard for a split second, and he thought he saw a figure standing by the tree line. His breath caught. When the light faded, there was nothing there. Mark shook his head and chuckled nervously. "Get a grip," he muttered. He returned to the living room, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Minutes later, another knock. This time it was louder, more insistent. He shot up from the couch and grabbed his phone, considering calling the police. But what would he say? Someone knocking on my door during a storm? He moved cautiously toward the door again, his hand trembling as he gripped the curtain and pulled it aside. There was no one there. Thunder crashed, and a flash of lightning revealed something horrifying. Muddy footprints leading from the back porch to the door. Mark's heart raced. He locked the door and checked all the windows, making sure everything was secure. His pulse thundered in his ears as he grabbed a kitchen knife and paced the house, peering through the blinds. The storm outside seemed to mock him with its relentless fury. Suddenly, the phone rang. He jumped, almost dropping the knife. When he picked up, there was only static. "Hello?" he whispered. A low, ragged breath filled the line. "Who's this?" Mark demanded. The breathing stopped, replaced by silence. Then a voice, barely a whisper, said, "I'm closer than you think." The line went dead. Mark's blood turned to ice. He slammed the phone down and backed into the corner, his eyes darting around the room. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the house made his skin crawl. Another knock, this time at the front door. He crept forward, gripping the knife so tightly his knuckles turned white. Lightning illuminated the window by the door, and for a split second, he saw a dark figure standing just outside. Motionless, rain dripping from a soaked hood. "Go away," Mark shouted. No answer. He could hear his own breathing, fast and shallow. The door handle jiggled. Mark's heart felt like it might burst from his chest. He pressed his back against the wall, gripping the knife like a lifeline. The handle stopped moving. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Finally, he summoned the courage to peek out the window. The figure was gone. He let out a shaky breath, but his relief was short-lived. A crash echoed from the kitchen. He spun around, knife at the ready. The back door was wide open, rain blowing in. "No," he whispered. Then he thought, "Hell. No. He slammed the door shut and locked it again, but he knew someone was inside. The storm raged louder, masking every sound that wasn't close. He could feel the air change, feel the presence of someone watching him. He moved slowly, his bare feet silent against the floor. Every creak of the house felt like a scream. He checked the first room. Empty. The closet. Empty. He moved to the hallway, his nerves fraying with each step. Lightning flashed again, and he caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. A shadow, just behind him. He spun around with a yell, slashing wildly with the knife. Nothing was there. His breath came in ragged gasps. His grip on reality felt as tenuous as his grip on the knife. He staggered into the bedroom, locking the door behind him. His hands were slick with sweat. The silence grew deafening. Then, from the closet, he heard it, breathing. He swallowed hard, his mouth dry as sandpaper. He inched toward the closet, the knife trembling in his hand. The door was slightly ajar, darkness swallowing whatever was inside. He reached out, his fingers brushing the edge. Suddenly, the door burst open, and a figure lunged at him. He stumbled back, slashing wildly. The knife connected with something solid, and a scream filled the room. The figure toppled to the floor, clutching its side. Mark ran, heart pounding. He threw open the front door and fled into the storm, rain drenching him instantly. He didn't look back. When he finally reached his neighbor's house, he banged on the door until they let him in. He called the police, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone. When they arrived, the house was empty. No sign of forced entry, no footprints. But the knife was missing, and in the pool of rainwater by the back door, there was a single handprint. Later that night, as Mark sat with a blanket wrapped around him, his phone buzzed. A text message. "See you next storm." It was a stormy evening when Emily pulled into the long, winding driveway leading up to the mansion. The house stood like a shadow against the dark sky, its sharp gables and tall windows giving it an ominous air. Thunder rumbled as she parked her car and stepped out into the cold rain. Her shoes splashed against the puddled pavement, the storm a living, breathing force all around her. Emily had been hired to house it for a wealthy couple who were away on a European vacation. The job seemed easy. Watch the house, feed the cat, and keep the place from burning down. But as she stood before the towering structure, an unsettling feeling crept up her spine. The rain intensified as she unlocked the massive front door and pushed it open. A gust of wind followed her inside, making the curtains flutter like ghostly hands. She shut the door quickly and turned the lock. The house was dark, save for a few dim lights along the hall. Every step she took echoed through the cavernous interior. The first hour passed uneventfully. She explored the main rooms, an expansive living room with antique furniture, a dining room with a long, polished table, and a library filled with dusty old books. Lightning flashed outside, briefly illuminating the portraits lining the walls. Their painted eyes seemed to follow her. Settling into the living room, Emily turned on the TV to drown out the storm. The cat, a gray tabby named Winston, curled up on the sofa beside her. The house creaked and groaned as the wind howled outside. Then the lights flickered. She glanced around nervously. The storm must be messing with the power, she thought. She reached for her phone, checking the time. 9:15 p.m. A loud creak came from the hallway, like the sound of a door slowly opening. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. She stood up, her heart racing, and moved toward the sound. The hallway was empty. She checked the doors. Each one was shut tight. A sudden flash of lightning lit up the window, and in that brief instant she thought she saw a figure standing outside, near the tree line. Her breath caught in her throat. She shook her head. "It's just the storm," she whispered to herself. "Nothing to be scared of." Returning to the living room, she tried to calm her nerves. The wind lashed against the windows, rain streaming down like tears. The storm seemed relentless. Then the phone rang. She jumped, the shrill sound cutting through the silence. She picked up the old landline on the side table. "Hello?" Static hissed on the other end. "Hello?" she repeated, her voice more insistent. A low breath came through the receiver. She hung up, her hands trembling. It was probably just a bad connection, she reasoned. But an uneasy feeling settled deep in her chest. Moments later, another crash of thunder shook the house. She glanced toward the back door, her eyes widened. Muddy footprints trailed from the doorway into the kitchen. The door she had locked was now slightly ajar, rainwater pooling on the floor. Emily felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter and slowly approached the door. Her hands trembled as she pushed it shut and turned the lock. The storm outside seemed alive, its fury growing with every passing second. Lightning illuminated the yard again, and this time she saw it clearly. Someone standing just beyond the porch, their face obscured by the shadows. The figure didn't move. She backed away, gripping the knife tightly. "Who's there?" she shouted. Silence. The figure was gone with the next flash of light. Emily ran through the house, locking every door and window she could find. Her pulse raced as she tried to stay calm, but every creak of the old floorboards made her flinch. Then came the second phone call. She hesitated before picking it up. Her hand shook as she lifted the receiver. "Who is this?" "I've been watching," a voice whispered. The line went dead. She dropped the phone as if it had burned her, her breath coming in short gasps. She wanted to scream, to run, but where? The storm was a raging beast outside, and inside she wasn't alone. She moved through the darkened house, her footsteps silent against the wood floor. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch her, their painted eyes following her every move. She felt trapped, the mansion turning into a labyrinth of shadows and fear. Lightning flashed again and she saw him, the figure, closer now, staring in through the window with hollow eyes and a grin that didn't belong on any human face. Emily stumbled back, the knife slipping from her grip. She ran into the hallway, her heart slamming against her chest. She could hear footsteps now, inside the house. She darted into a small room and pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath. The storm roared outside, masking the sound of the intruder. But she could feel his presence, the oppressive weight of being watched. A loud crash from the living room sent her into a panic. She bolted for the front door, but a shadow moved in front of it. She skidded to a stop, her eyes wide with terror. The footsteps grew louder, closer. She spun around, searching for a weapon, anything she could use. Her eyes fell on the fireplace poker. She grabbed it and held it up, her hands trembling. "Stay away from me," she screamed. Lightning illuminated the figure again, now only feet away. His grin stretched impossibly wide, his eyes dark pits. She swung the poker wildly, connecting with something solid. A terrible, inhuman scream filled the air. She didn't wait to see what happened next. She ran, throwing open the front door and fleeing into the storm. The rain soaked her instantly, the wind whipping her hair into her face. She stumbled down the slippery path, her bare feet slipping on the wet ground. When she reached the neighbor's house, she banged on the door, her fists raw and aching. It took what felt like an eternity before the door opened, and she collapsed into the arms of an older man who looked just as shocked as she felt. The police arrived minutes later. They searched the mansion from top to bottom but found no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no evidence of a break-in, nothing. Emily sat in stunned silence as the officers questioned her. She couldn't explain what she had seen, couldn't make sense of the nightmare she had just escaped. As dawn broke and the storm finally passed, she felt a sliver of relief. It was over. Or so she thought. 2 nights later, back in her own apartment, she received a text message. It was a photo of the mansion, taken from the outside. "I'm still watching.